Comparative World Religions. Welcome to Chapter 2. We're looking at Indigenous religions, and I am Doug Beatty, teaching here World Religions on the online class at LCC. Science without religion is lame, Albert Einstein said. Religion without science is blind. Here are several pictures of different religious symbols. I can tell you that not all symbols are the same, or I should say it this way, you don't use the same symbol all the time in the exact same religion, so they might be a little bit different here and there, but this is pretty close to what we'll be seeing throughout the semester. And there are a lot of different religions in the world. Some say there are 5,000 of them. Who knows? I haven't counted. But we do know we're going to look at around 10. And with the advent of a lot of counting from a lot of different people, we see the numbers. Christianity be 2.1 billion and 1.5 billion of Islam. Hindu, that is in the Hindu religion, there's almost a billion. And then it goes way down there for their Buddhism. If you didn't know that, it was about a third of Islam. And then primal or indigenous religions we're going to talk about, there's only 300 million of them, but that's the size of the United States. That's a lot of people all around the world. There's a lot of people in Africa, and there's a lot of people in other places. I'd like to point out, though, how many people are Jews. Not very many by comparison. We're hardly going to spend any time on Spiritism or the other ones here, even Sikhism for that matter. But Judaism has really made an influence on the world, and we'll see why later. And then we see some other religions too here that we're going to look at. All of them in yellow have been that. 4.2 of Jainists, and they are mostly in India. And Shinto, most of those are in Japan. Another breakdown of religions, not that it's all that important, it may be interesting to you. So if you wanted to pause it and take a look and think about these things. But that just gives you an introduction of what we're headed toward. Here's a map of the world and the breakdown of the different religions in the world. You can see Russia here is Orthodox Christianity, and the blue is Christianity, and it's kind of spreading in purple and blue. I would not separate Catholic and Orthodox versus Protestant as far as a religion. They are all part of Christianity. They are a denominational section or sector of Christianity. But like Sunni and Shiite in the lighter green, Sunni of the rest, they're all Islam. And then there are a lot of other Buddhists as well. So to break them down and separate them as religions, I think is not a good idea. But it is a good idea to understand that there are different denominational structures and breakdowns of every religion. Some say there are some 30,000 breakdowns within Christianity. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But for this class, we're only going to look at 3 actually for Christianity, and for the most part 3 for Islam. There are 4 for Judaism, but we'll look at those as we get to them. Here's a picture of the Middle East, and this is important because this is where the 3 Western religions were formed and began their history, really. Right here in this picture. And this gives you an illustration too. I like for people to understand how big Israel is. It is a very small place, and about the size of New Jersey, a little bit bigger. But here we have the 3 major religions. In Judaism started here, Christianity also started here, and the three breakdown mosque areas, very important holy places for Islam, are in this picture. The number one of Islam is Mecca, number two is Medina, and the third most important Islamic holy place is here in Jerusalem. It's the Dome of the Rock, the Golden Dome. I put out a video last time that said it was a mosque, and it is not. I did not mean to say that. The mosque is actually about 100 yards or 200 yards from the Dome of the Rock, and it is on the Temple Mount area, but what we see, the Dome of the Rock, is not a mosque. But the three major religions, and they are called Western religions, are, and in the order that they started, Judaism, Christianity, and then in 622 in the Common Era is Islam. I think maps are important for us to understand. Just on this map here, this is Saudi Arabia, so Iran here. But here's India and China, and then there are 7 major religions started on this map. And here they are: Hinduism, Jainism, Shinto, Buddhism, Taoism, Sikhism are the major ones mentioned here. The one that isn't mentioned, I've got to think now all of a sudden, I take myself to task, is Confucianism. It's missing on this list. I'll have to change that, but it started right here in China as well. What are the indigenous religions really called? I'm sure most of you could see, and as you read in the textbook, they probably are called indigenous. They might be called or have other names as well, such as oral, traditional, non-literate, native, and all these are different words for that. It's on the quiz, is why I have this on here. And you might have different depictions of what you think maybe an indigenous religion is. Typically, they don't have texts. Now, our American Indians did, but most of those were destroyed. They were not technically written, handwritten like we think of as written texts, but they were beaded in a lot of works that they had, and most of those were destroyed. But for what it's worth, Department, indigenous religions are, the name comes from the idea that that's where they started, from that place. So if we think back to the picture before, Shinto started in Japan. Hinduism started in India. They are indigenous religions. And then the Indian religions that they have, you might say a couple of indigenous religions to America would be Mormonism, one, and then Scientology would be another one, if you consider those religion or Christianity or whatever. Scientology is definitely not Christianity, but it is indigenous in the sense of starting here in America. On this slide, we're just taking a look at a couple things. There's a modern, seem to be interest in indigenous religions, and some people would say it has to do with the eco crisis, the idea that people want to be back to green. I mean, the Indians, used everything. When they killed a buffalo, they used every part of it. And a lot of indigenous religions are very reverent toward all of the material world, and they are not wasteful. And so the eco crisis is one of the thoughts behind it. It's kind of a theory. We don't know why so many people are more interested in it now. But then there's the reverence toward the earth itself, whole climate control or other things. Climate changes, I should say, not control. I can control my climate in my car or my house, but don't have a whole lot of control of that, of natural goings on. But They also might think, and have stated in the book, that the photography and the ability to record sounds may have brought the interest of indigenous religions to the forefront. They generally exist within cultures where every object and act may have some sort of significance or religious significance. And this is called, and you find it in your textbook, this is on the quiz, so you'll need to remember it, it's holistic. And so that's why I have it here. On this page, we see some animism. The idea, there's anime. You have some other animations done. Religions were, and they're more of a pantheistic idea that everything is religious, has a religious significance, and maybe everything's a god, or a lot of things are out there. And that comes through in animism. Anime, just for what it's worth, is a lot of history, legend, and tales of the Shinto or Japanese religion, Shinto. And then we have Fantasia. The idea that anime, or just the very word, animation for Disney cartoons or any kind of cartoons, is the idea that they're bringing it to life. So you should be able to make the correlation of a life giving from maybe a lake, or a mouse, or a tree, or a sun. So you can see those things. It's called animism, when everything has a nature of life in it, is living, and maybe a god. Remember Mushi from Mulan, played by Eddie Murphy? Well, that was kind of is an anime of sorts. He was animated and very Shinto-like, for what it's worth, department. They also had the idea that religious activity and practice is important because the primary purpose is often to place individuals, families, and groups in the right relationship with the gods. I mean, Eddie Murphy was trying to get it right with his character in Mulan and trying to set things straight. Well, that is what religious activity, whether it's Christian or Jewish or Islam, Hindu, and Shinto, is all about. Now, there is some debate whether Buddhists, Confucianism, or Taoism are really religions, because they have so much philosophy in them. But the idea behind the indigenous religions is really to get right with the gods that are just kind of imminent. If you could do a rain dance and bring them to give you rain, because you've been found worthy through your dance. Or in Taoism, you may have to feed your ancestors or honor them by doing what they did exactly, and then their ancestors will bring the right relationship again. And so that's what indigenous religions are, one of the things they are known for. And then the question is about what is sacred or holy? What is it really? Is it something that's just worshipped? Something you sacrifice to? We got to recognize there's a couple different uses for the idea of holy. We could have holy things, and then we could have a holy God. We could have sacred places, or we could have a sacred entity. A lot of people use holy and sacred interchangeably, and that's fine. But the question is just exploring here the idea of what is sacred and holy mean. I really think it's used in a Christian and Jewish context, that it's high and lifted up, something honored, revered. But not all spaces are that way. Some were. Not all places, not all people, but some were. And only though God was worshipped, at least in those. And we'll see others worship their God, their equivalent God, and sacrifice. So the question is, what is sacred? There could be several answers to what is sacred, but I want to just share with you a very quick little idea here with a Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, built 770 years ago. It's a building, and they considered it in a sense sacred, but what it was not a place of worship. It was sacred because King Louis IX built this for the holy crown. He would call it the holy crown of thorns, the very crown that Jesus wore on the cross, they thought at least. And so he built this thing to enshrine the crown of thorns. This building still stands today. It's a beautiful building on the This is the inside of the building, and right here is where the crown was. Like most countries, they've gone through some civil war and some uprising and some challenges, especially those in Europe. And they did this in the 1600s, and that crown went missing. And they ransacked every public place, anything that had to do with any kind of king, whether it was King David or King Jesus or King Louis or King Charles or whatever. They ransacked it, and the common people did, and did a lot of damage. The 1600s. This is that particular thing up close. Right here, there's a little place for the box to enshrine the crown. The box isn't there anymore, but the building still stands, and all the beautiful artwork, which is another story. This is when it was built in 1248. Took 7 years to build this. And here, and by contrast, Notre Dame, a very commonly known, understood, probably because of the bell ringer, that this church became very prominent. And I don't remember, 1600s maybe, 17, Notre Dame, but it was built and started building in 1160 before Sainte-Chapelle was built, and it didn't get completed. The point is, which one is holy? Well, there's for different reasons. On the right, you have a place of enshrinement, and the one on the center and left is one where people worship God. The one on the right was not built for people to worship at all. However, it has turned into a music hall, and a lot of people do things. They do that at Notre Dame also. But at any rate, I just thought that was interesting. I will make a quick comment here, that not very many churches do you go to that they have warning signs to watch out for pickpockets. But they do inside Notre Dame, and there's a picture of it. What is sacred? It's high and lifted up, set apart. That's really the idea behind it, the Hebrew word, at least from the Jewish context, and I think that's where I'm going to go with this. It really does fit with all religions. It's set apart from the common. It's different. It's otherworldly. It's not from this world. It's high and lifted up. It's holy. It's revered and honored. But set apart is really the idea of the word. It's different. It's special. So we have special time. And this is not necessarily a religious time, isn't, but it can be. The Jews had their Sabbath. The Muslims have their prayer time. The Hindus just have a time whenever you want to put it together. Indigenous people, it varied from tribe to tribe, to religion. What's special and what's sacred about time? Well, there's two very unique ideas behind time. One One idea is just, time comes second after second after second, day after day. The other one is that eternity, time is always or never was and always is. And the Hindu perspective is their idea of time isn't just this life, it's the lives that they have to continue about. But the idea of the sacred, and there are times maybe that your life feels more holy. I doubt if you feel worshiped, but there might be a time for worship versus a time not to. Then we have a sacred space or different places. We have a kiva down here in the lower left side in Mesa Verde, Colorado. And then we have a burial ground on the right in Michigan. And these sacred spaces are doorways to get to the other world. A lot of times through death, but they think, as in the Kiva experience, you didn't have to die to get to the other world. You may just have to smoke the right stuff. Here's a picture of Mesa Verde, and I've been there a few times. And this is an up close, and the round hole there, they haven't put the top on here, but we have in other places the tops on the right. And then you kind of see they can go down in it and go around, and they're not really sure, the archaeologists, the excavators, they're not sure exactly how it was used, but they did think that it was a ceremonial activity place. It was a sacred place for people to get to come to, and maybe smoke something or who knows what. But they do believe that this is a sacred place. What do they wear? Just on a side note, what did the people wear in Mesa Verde? They wore these things. This is called a yucca plant. And yucca plants can be boiled, and then you can see here in the middle of the screen, right here, when they boil it, then it comes into little tiny fibers. And we have found shoes and sandals made of yucca plant, rope, and skirts, and all kinds of woven things made out of yucca plants. Amazing. But they were using what they had right there. The technology was not far advanced, so they used what they could. And many think that they saw all things as sacred. Some Indians thought, now this is not in Colorado, this is in southeast Wyoming, that the Devil's Tower was sacred. Now there is a bonus assignment you can do for this particular monument, and the idea is finding some different tales or different stories behind it. Look on your coursework in your assignments and find that. Then they have different origin stories. A lot of different religions have flood stories. They have their different gods. They don't all worship the same. Some might think of the big eagle in the sky. Some may worship type of a sun god. And it depends on what indigenous religion we're talking about, who we're discussing. But part of their indigenous important ideas had to do with their parents, their grandparents, their ancestors, the people who came before them, and to honor them by continuing doing what they were doing. That might give you some insight. Art, music, religion, all these different things were hard to separate. It was all part of their religious life, or all part of life, whether it was religious or not. The deal is they're thinking it was all religious. Everything they did had something to do with their religion. It's hard to distinguish that. It was just everyday activity, and to bring them into the right relationship again to the other world or the outside God. They had sacred practices, and so there were several things that they might do with their dream quests. They had different ceremonies from maybe birth or the maturation process, which is what the dream quest was about, marking their entry into adulthood. They are going through puberty. They had different exercises they might put them through depending on who we're talking about. Marriage is another practice that would be sacred for some, and they would do that differently. And other activities that happen, and even death itself was a sacred practice. The word taboo, I think we understand it, that you're forbidden to do that or have that or be there. It's taboo, or talk about that subject. Maybe grew up in a house that it was a taboo to talk about sex. But in indigenous religions, sometimes it was taboo to eat certain things, maybe say the liver, or to it was taboo to go to a certain place in that sacred area where grandpa was burned, or who knows. But the taboo are those places, people, or animals, or days, or phases of life that were forbidden. Sacrifice is very important. We've seen sacrifice in all the studies of the history of mankind, and we are assuming that religion has been part of mankind ever since mankind has been around. It's a big far leap to say that if people expect that or believe that people have been around for 100,000 years. But the reality of it is, in every archaeological find of human remains of societies or different civilizations, we have found different illustrations or what they are interpreting as sacrificial worship. A lot of times in indigenous religions, there are shaman. This is kind of the medicine man of the day. This is an English term for them, but he was kind of the priest, the person who would give direction and prophesy or talk to the people, giving them an oracle, that is, telling them what would happen in the future. This is good, this is bad, do this or don't do that, or whatever. And they often called him a medicine man because he was probably one of the smarter guys in the neighborhood or in the tribe or in the area that knew what was good for people when they were sick and what was not good for people. They were the intermediary between the visible and invisible. That is, between the people that they associated with and the God that they wanted to connect with. They use divination, come in different ways. The indigenous people of American Indians were very similar. It's kind of funny. There's a correlation here between them and some Taoists of 2,000 years ago. 2,500 years ago. The powers that they were looking for and using and things that they were doing were very similar. Very two different places and time frames. Many people feel we have a predetermined future, and this can be found by divination. The idea of trying to figure out the future through the stars, or maybe through throwing sticks on the ground, or dice, or something like that. Turtle shells they would use, or they might use a liver when it came out of the animal and how it laid. But divination was done in all sorts of ways for all sorts of reasons, but it was to determine something. Typically, as I mentioned before, indigenous religions did not have a written word. So what they used artifacts and artistic expressions, masks, paintings, body paint, chants, dances, stories, Oh, they love to tell stories. Sometimes they would get together with other, uh, maybe competing tribes at times, and just have someone stand up and give stories for days. I know this to be the fact in Kansas, at least. Some of the tribes got together around Medicine Lodge, Kansas, and they just went on for days telling stories. But they would have chants, and they loved to play games and get together. And it was part of religious activity, but it's also just part of life. Um, then we have an understanding that Native American arts and crafts, it's a felony to offer imitations as the real thing. Just thought that would be interesting for you to know, that you cannot make up something and say it's Indian. It has to truly be from them. Otherwise, it's illegal. It's a felony. Okay, indigenous religions are under the threat of being lost due to 4 different things. And this is going to close out our talk on indigenous religions. You need to read the chapter and take the exam, the quiz, as well as fill out the worksheet. What is causing a threat? Global spread of pop culture. Thank you, pop music, Britney Spears, or whoever. But it's, a lot of rapping is now the thing, especially in cultures in Africa. They're picking up on that kind of thing, and they're doing the same thing, and they're really likening to it. But the spread of pop culture is a threat to a lot of indigenous religions. They're losing their identity because they're taking in the very things we may be listening to on the radio. The loss of natural environments, cutting down the rainforest isn't a fake thing, it's a real thing. And those people that live in those places, it's not just in South America, it's in different places of the world. But when our urban mentality spreads into and encroaches upon these people's homes, they lose their environment and lose their way of life. They also are losing their traditional language. My understanding is that there's only a few thousand people that actually speak Cherokee. My family has some history of that in it, and I think there are 20 or 30,000 Cherokee still alive. I'm not sure how many, but not even 5,000 speak the language. And this is true of a lot of tribal languages. And there's a video for you to watch as one of your assignments to speak to this very thing. It's the losing of language will lose your identity as a religion. And then lastly, proselytizing, that is trying to convert people from their religion or into their religion. Say, someone tries to convert you into Buddhism from this indigenous religion, then they're proselytizing. Now, typically Buddhists don't do that, and neither do Hindus. For that matter, Jews don't. Christians and Muslims are very advanced in proselytizing and encouraging conversions. But that's the threat, the way the religious people see it. And of course, people that want them to be converted into their religion don't see it as a threat, but that's a good thing. But that's the final assignment. Picture here is the very video that I want you to look at of the Indian language that is dying. I believe it's in California or Washington, anywhere out west. So please summarize this and turn it in. Have a great day.